Hey, what is going on, everyone? It's me, Mr. Mario, and I do want to start this off here by saying this can be a little bit different. Now, I've done a couple other videos similar to this with the Game Boy Color as well as the original Game Boy DMG, and I've done videos like this on several other consoles as well too, where they're not necessarily tutorials. So if you're going to follow along with this like a tutorial, that's not the case with this video. This is more just a video you can kind of watch on the side or watch just for your enjoyment or what have you. And if you do want to learn something from this and even kind of follow along if you want to, I won't stop you. But if this is not granular enough or the instructions aren't verbose enough, hey, the point of this video is this is not a tutorial. This is actually even something I was doing here for the first time. The other thing here is I am going to have the video up on screen. Of course, there's going to be editing and all that fun stuff, but I'm also going to be commentating all of this post-production, which I typically don't do for these videos. The reason why I'm doing this here is because I recorded all of this, I was talking while I was doing everything, which is typical for what I do with these, but all of my audio got messed up, all of it. The audio for the entire recording, which has never happened in the past, I don't know, 3-4 years I've owned this camera. So unfortunately, it's even to the point, it's not like it's garbled or anything, it's just constant buzzing. There's absolutely nothing to repair or salvage from it, so that's why we're just kind of starting from the beginning here. But that's also to say, if you hear me talking, which I hope you do hear, and you kind of see my hands are moving all over the place, kind of like I'm talking with my hands, because I do that, and it's just my hand talk doesn't really match up with my audio talk here, that's exactly what's happening. Either way, getting into all of this, I have been showing the Game Boy Advance right here, and I ended up picking up a Glacier Game Boy Advance for this modification. Now, this is going to be the Funny Playing version 2 IPS kit, and one thing with these kits is that I love them, but I like the whole entire kit because I love to reshell the console, make it look and feel like new. However, there's also typically things you have to do with all of this where you need to go in and either file things down, Dremel, cut things away. Personally, I don't like doing that. I really don't. So when it comes to putting in a screen on a Game Boy console like this, whether it is an original one all the way up to a Game Boy Advance, I like to just get a whole kit. I don't like to just get the screen. But the story behind this here, so you're seeing that the Game Boy I'm holding right now is not in great shape at all. I don't remember how I got that. All I can really tell you is I'm pretty sure I got it from a thrift store years and years ago when I was in college, and I probably got it for little money. Like, I don't think I spent that much on it just because look at the condition of it, but it all works. It boots up, it plays the games, the audio works, everything works on it just fine. The reason why I'm doing this mod here is this mod is actually not for me. This mod is actually going to be for my girlfriend's sister for a birthday present for them. My girlfriend and I were talking about this, and her sister was wanting a modified Game Boy Advance, specifically one of these original Game Boy Advance consoles with a backlight. As you can see, this one right here, the one that looks a lot nicer, this was actually one that I went out in town and I picked up because I was going to pick up this one here, the nicer one, and modify it. I ended up not having to do that in the end. Funny thing is, I actually even looked at a few Game Boy Advance consoles locally here in town, and I purchased the worst one, not only because it was cheaper, but just because there were two others that were in like pristine shape, but I couldn't bring myself to buy them because I was like, well, not only they're a little more expensive, but also I don't want to buy something in like perfect shape just to completely rip it apart and replace everything. So then it turns out when I came back home, I end up seeing the original Game Boy Advance here, the one that I've been showing, and this here is my Game Boy DMG that I ended up, doing a kit and everything on, so I did a video on that one previously. But the thing is on here with the Game Boy Advance, like the one that is in horrible shape here that you can see, I actually ended up finding that in my basement because I kind of just looked through my consoles and I saw that one. So I said, you know what, the nicer one I bought in town for this, I'm actually going to hold on to that for another day. And this one that's in worse shape, I'm going to repurpose this. Also because I kind of want to give this a bunch new extra, I guess, renewed sense of life on here. You can see how bad this is right now, and by the end it's going to look completely different. Either way, going back to the original purpose of this here, my girlfriend was looking to get a console done up, so she had actually asked me, hey, how much would it be to get one of these modded, or to buy one of these pre-modded, because she was looking for one for her sister for a birthday present, to which I said, no. You're not going to buy one pre-modded. You're not going to pay for the labor on here. If you're dating me, I'll go ahead and do all this. She was asking, am I sure? And I said, yeah, absolutely. Like, just tell me what we need to do. So we ended up getting an original Game Boy Advance, got that sorted. I found the kit and everything. We also settled on a color as well, too. And that's when we ended up going through this process here. Now, I have never worked on a original Game Boy Advance console. Ever. The videos I've been putting up recently, they've all been like my first time modifications, like the Game Boy Color, the DMG, even the Game Boy Advance. These are all first time installations for me, so this is also definitely a bit fun as well too. I have also learned that the Game Boy modding community is really awesome when it comes to products, when it comes to anything that has been designed and built out and all of that. So there is modifications for every single thing you can think of, and I have nothing but good things to say about it. It's fantastic to see. Either way, I did make sure that this Game Boy Advance was working here. You all saw earlier that I popped in my copy of Max Payne, which I thought was a great comparison. I will compare later, because typically people, I feel like, would compare with a brighter game like a Super Mario game, which is totally understandable, but I liked using Max Payne because the game is so gritty and dark that on the original Game Boy Advance, you can't see anything. I don't know how it was ever playable, but once we end up upgrading the screen and all that, oh my goodness, it's so much nicer. Either way, right here, I was just making my way into the Game Boy Advance. So it did have tri-wing screws all along the outside, except there is one small Phillips head screw, which is where the batteries are at. So that is the one Phillips head screw on the outside, kinda sorta, that I was removing. And then at this point, you can kind of just, dump out any screws that might be a little rough to get out. And here we go. We are actually inside the system itself. Now here, all I'm going to do for the rest of this is, remove all the buttons and such carefully and really unbuckle it all. So we just need to really isolate and remove the Game Boy Advance motherboard itself at this point. So that's what we're going to work on. There's just a few screws that you need to take out. Just work on unscrewing them, and then you can remove the motherboard. Now the screen is attached right here, like you can see just with that ribbon. So you do just have to disconnect this clasp here, and then you can remove the ribbon, and just be careful with it. I didn't have to be super careful just because, we're going to be replacing everything here, but still I want to be respectful of the hardware and such. And there we go. We do have a bunch of other extra stuff on here, but as you can see, we just have the Game Boy Advance console itself and the speaker that's attached. Everything else we're going to be replacing completely, so it doesn't matter. And yes, I know that there's speaker modifications and such that you can do, but we decided not to do any of that. We were really just looking to reshell the Game Boy Advance in a preferred color, give it, nice brand new buttons, rubber pads, all that fun stuff, and put a lovely new screen in there. But that is all there is to it right there. That is the motherboard itself, and thankfully it doesn't take all too much effort to pull it out. Now what I did here was just like all my other Game Boy systems that I've worked on. Typically, that speaker is kind of gross. That speaker is gross on like all the systems that I work on. So all I did was take a Q-tip with some isopropyl alcohol and just cleaned up that speaker real well because, again, I just decided to reuse the same speaker on here. So I cleaned up the speaker, and then I decided to clean up the rest of the console as well too. Really, my goal is, thankfully, this console wasn't all too dirty, but especially like the cartridge ports, I like to clean those up as well too, because really the goal is not only these are older systems, but if your cartridge port is clean and your cartridge is clean, then you shouldn't have to ever blow on your cartridges. You should just pop them in and they should work. So that's kind of just what I did right here. Thankfully, this one wasn't all too bad, but yeah, I just went through the cleaning process of this. So there was a big message included with this, which is test before installing, and that is exactly what I wanted to do. So at this point, I started doing a kind of sort of partial install, I guess you could say. Really, it's just I wanted to get the console to the point where it would turn on and display something and work with the new screen, because you don't want to go through this whole process and worst comes to worst, your screen is not working. Here, I started pulling out the pieces. I was looking through the kit. So one thing that I love with these kits, I always love, is that the front piece that you would see the screen through, it's always converted to a glass front, and I absolutely love that. I truly love that. It's much better than the plastic. There's also adhesive. There's kind of some padding there as well too. A few already pre-cut and I believe even pre-tinned pieces of wire as well too. Your ribbon, and of course your screen itself. Now, the nice thing was, for anybody who might be kind of iffy about soldering, soldering is completely optional for this installation. You can successfully complete this install without soldering at all. Although do keep in mind that you're not going to be able to take full advantage of the installation here if you don't solder those 3 wires. I will get to that later. Now, from what I've seen for the original Game Boy Advance, there's 2 type of connectors that you would use here, and it is completely console dependent. This looks like one of the older consoles that uses the bigger connector, so what I did here was I just verified which side I would use. So no matter which original Game Boy Advance you have, this will work just fine. You could see that you would just bend it kind of the other way. You would use the other side of the ribbon here if you had that other connector. But since I had the bigger pin connector right here to use, that's the side of the ribbon that I used. So I just attached it to the Game Boy Advance here. And once I verified that's what I needed, I started moving on to the screen itself. I was kind of figuring out how to get this all placed right here. I know this is not going to be the correct orientation and such, but we have the Game Boy motherboard there. We have the connector, I guess the flex cable, I guess connector itself you're going to use. And then I attach it to the screen like that, because all completely stripped out like this is how it should look. And from here, I started getting the Game Boy reconnected. Now, you can use an external power source, like, from the wall and such, and adapt it if you want to. I was not doing that. I just tried to kind of finagle it and kind of just do, I guess, a quick and dirty, not installation, but I guess test right here, where I was getting the motherboard partially into the shell where the Game Boy would be, so I could attach 2 AA batteries to it and get this up and running. So I kind of got it to a comfortable point, and once I was able to do that, I of course popped in my copy of Max Payne. I plugged in 2 batteries that I had on hand. As you can see, they are not matching at all, but as long as the batteries work, it is totally fine. Don't worry, even though the screen is upside down right there, I was, treating it gently. And then at this point, I just had to get the console up and running. Which, check this out, okay? I'm turning it on. As you can see, everything displays. It's looking nice. But just look at this. Like, all the text is actually readable. You can see everything. It's bright. It's so much nicer than what we saw at the beginning of the video. So there we go. Like, the Game Boy Advance is working with the new screen, and this is Max Payne looking beautiful and, dare I say, even playable this time around with this setup here. I mean, of course, you can't really play it like this in full, but still, this was good enough to test. So once it was good enough to test, I turned off the console, removed power from it, and then we just continued onwards. Now, this is a bit frustrating. Unfortunately, I did wire up the 3 wires to the ribbon itself, but I was not able to get the footage recorded on this for whatever reason. I guess I just forgot to hit record, but this wasn't all too intense here. All I did was use a little bit of flux on these pads. I tinned them with some solder, and then I soldered the 3 wires there. I believe all of them are about the same length, so there's not really any trimming you have to do. They're already pre-trimmed, and they work really well. But you do not have to solder to ground, which is nice. So nothing too big there. It all still works just fine. It's just 1 extra wire. Again, this step here, you don't have to do. You do not have to solder these in, but do keep in mind that this does give you the nice added benefit of actually being able to adjust the brightness of the screen. So if you don't do this here, then you're just going to be stuck on 1 brightness, I believe. Now, you're going to see that this is bent right here, and I actually made a mistake on this part. You see, if you end up using the smaller side of this ribbon here, you will have to bend in the larger side and kind of tape it and secure it down. However, the nice thing is I end up messing up here, so I just kind of unbent this here. But if you're not going to be using that smaller side, like if you have one of the original Game Boy Advance consoles, which requires the larger side of this ribbon here, you would just take this other side, the smaller side, and you would just put it flat, like set it flat against the back of the screen like this, and then you can just tape it on using something like Captain Tape. I would recommend using Captain Tape, not like super glue, or especially not like electrical tape or anything. Just get yourself some Captain Tape and you should be good to go. So that's what I did right here. I kind of just unbent this here, corrected my mistake, and then just put some Captain Tape across here to get it secured. Now with that side secured, it was also recommended to insulate this as well too. So all of the components that you could see on the interface here, I just did the same thing. I took some strips of Captain Tape, ended up cutting them to length here, and then I just secured this all down. So not only this would be secured gently to the back of the screen itself, but just so, you know, it stays a little bit insulated. It's not going to be touching anything directly. Here I also just want to show kind of a bit of a comparison. I took a photo as well too. You could see that the screen is like about maybe 2 or 2.5 Game Boy Advance cartridges in size. So it's all small enough to work with here, but you know, it's still, you can still navigate it hopefully easy enough as long as you go slow and you're just careful with what you're doing here. Now here I got the screen kind of moved out the way to the side, and we ended up looking at the rest of the console here, and this is what we are looking at. So of course earlier I was, you know, looking at the screen cover there, but I think, yeah, no, that's still, that one was actually a plastic one from what I could see. Either way, right here we have fresh screws, we have fresh buttons, we also have a nice new casing right here. So it's this delicious looking green, brand new like shoulder buttons, brand new, I guess, sides, I guess you can say. I was going to say shoulders, but no. So the sides would be there. And right there, I'm kind of pointing out where you would have these start and select buttons. There is a little bit of plastic you would typically have to Dremel out and kind of file down. But thankfully, because I already got a pre-cut kit, I didn't have to do any work on this. So that was really nice. But you can see everything is right here, so it's all looking pretty good. Here, we'll get a little bit of a zoom in and a comparison. You could see on the original top untouched casing that all of that is intact, while as you could see on the bottom, it has been already cut a little bit. So if you're going to be doing this mod yourself, like completely from scratch with existing casing, you will just have to trim that out the way. So now working on the screen, this is always a little bit nerve-wracking to me, but what I did here was just at the beginning, I decided to go ahead and work on applying this. So I activated the adhesive strips here, and I ended up getting this all on the top of the console, as you can see, I guess like the front shell right here. So got that nice new glass piece just installed, and it seems to fit perfectly. So here I cleaned up a little bit, but I was also applying pressure just to make sure it sticks really well. And it looks to be easy enough right here once this is secured in. The harder part is the actual like inside here that I'm going to work on. This will be the piece that you'll have to, you know, actually remove and such here so you can, you know, see the screen that you're going to be installing. For this, I just carefully took like a piece of, I guess, side bent tweezers that you would use for, you know, just mobile installations, phone installs and all that. I end up getting this, you know, set of tweezers from my iFixit toolkit, but I kind of just took this here and started gently working away at the side here to end up exposing this. And then once I was able to get a firm enough grasp, I just, of course, you know, started ripping it off here. You could see like what I'm doing here. I was able to get enough of a grip where I just started, there we go, just started pulling that back and then just carefully remove it. Since I did slightly touch the inside as well too, I just went in with a piece of microfiber cloth and cleaned that up real good as well too, so there's not all too much on the inside here. Now this additional adhesive is a piece that you end up putting on the inside of the front shell right here, and it's going to fit exactly between the shell and the screen itself. And this is very much kind of a point of no return type thing, because essentially what happens is you end up putting this here, so it's going to be incredibly sticky. So you want to make sure that it's all going to fit properly and look good on the shell itself and kind of just be, you know, properly aligned and all of that. However, when you end up putting the screen on top of this, it is such a strong bond that is made here that it's pretty much recommended, like, hey, you got to be like double, triple checking here and 300% sure this is what you want to do, because if you stick this all here and then you put the screen in and you mess up, like it's going to be near impossible to cleanly remove that screen without destroying it. So that's just what I worked on here. I started kind of just carefully going all along this here and sticking this adhesive to the inside of the shell. Now, good news here, I got it. I felt pretty confident about my work here, so I was able to continue onwards with the install. To get a very rough idea of what I would be doing as well too, I kind of just lined it up, just kind of floating it on top of everything, just so I would at least know how the screen is supposed to be installed and where everything is going to go. But I felt like I was able to get this down pretty well. This is not where the install happens, but you can see it looks a little something like that there. Now this is what I did, right? Because the biggest thing was I wanted to get all the alignment proper. So I got the screen with the Game Boy back in that kind of testing mode right there, except as you can see, I kind of just laid the screen gently on top of the Game Boy Advance's motherboard itself. And then what I did while the screen was on, my plan was I was going to come in here and apply the screen to the shell itself, being careful to not damage anything, but just so I could actually get a real-time image on screen and align it properly. You can see my plan kind of sort of coming to fruition right here, where of course I'm kind of figuring out what I'm going to do on that. But then here, when I've decided that, you know, I've pretty much figured out what I'm going to do here, we're kind of getting to that point of no return. So we have removed, it's official, we've removed the, I guess, protection that the screen had right there, and it's now time to get this applied. So that's what I was doing. You might not be able to see at the best angle here, but it was more, I was less concerned about it looking good on camera and more, I just had to look at it with my actual eyeballs here and get it all set up. But as you can see, I was just real careful about it. I got it all aligned, and I was able to stick it in there successfully. I would say this is easily the hardest part of the installation itself, just because everything else, you know, you can do just fine, but the hardest part is really, in my opinion, just getting that screen properly aligned to get it like as perfect as possible for the Game Boy Advance itself. But the good news here was that I felt pretty confident with my alignment of the screen and the installation. So with that, the screen itself is pretty much all installed. Now I started getting to the point of soldering in all of the extra wires right here. Well, extra, there was only 3 of them. And again, this part of the installation is completely optional. Now, I do want to explain this here because I've kind of hinted at this a few times, but kind of just explain what is going on here. You can do all this install without tacking in these wires, but the way this is designed is that if you want to, you can solder in these 3 wires, and then you can hold down the select button and use the shoulder buttons to increase and decrease the brightness. So off camera, I had already applied flux and tinned the TP2 point here with some solder. And all I did was come in here and wire up this TP2 point. This is going to be for the select button, so this would wire up to the SEL or cell or select pad on the ribbon itself. So there we go. that's one of the wires done. With that single pad done there, since we were done with the select button, I just came in here with some isopropyl alcohol and a Q-tip and cleaned up that test pad real well. Again, that is going to be the TP2 test pad that you would solder for the select button functionality. While I was here, I also decided to do some cleaning on the other buttons as well too, just because I saw they were just a tiny bit worn after, you know, so many years of being used, or even not used in this case here. But, you know, just, I guess, wear and tear from the previous owner. Now, to kind of get this all squeezed together and secured and just nice and flush with everything, there's also a piece of, I guess, foam or insulation that does come with this, and this is supposed to go between the back of the screen and your Game Boy Advance's motherboard. So you can just see right here, you kind of have to set it up like this, and I'm also showing right there, that is also why you have to trim that back if you do not have a pre-trimmed kit, because there is a little piece of the, I guess, ribbon connecting to the screen that is going to impede where the select button would be. So it's very important that that part is trimmed. But either way, you just have to come in here with your insulation once you have the screen installed, and you just put it firmly behind the screen. And at this point here, I started working on getting the rest of the buttons configured for the front of the shell itself. So of course, you know, the shoulders here, I guess the side pieces, and also the buttons. So like the rubber pads needed for the start and select buttons, the A and B buttons, as well as the D-pad, and all of the accompanying pads with those as well too. Right here, I started playing around with the wires quite a bit, just because thankfully there's really, again, not any trimming that you have to do, but I did want to be very conscious of where I was going to be running all the wires. So what you can do for each of these, you know, for the shoulder buttons, you're kind of going to want to run them on the sides like this, because you're going to be running them to the other side of the motherboard. So you can kind of put it all back in place like this right here, and then we can get everything wired up. Now here I was just checking my wires to make sure I was getting everything to the right points here, but at this point I started working on the left button. So I took the wire meant for the left, left shoulder button here, and you just have to wire up to this point. This point I had already fluxed and tinned with solder and such, so I just had to come in here with the wire, get it tacked in, and that's all there was to it. It's as easy as that. From here, I did the same on the other side to the right shoulder button. So this is the point right there. I just took a little bit of flux. I come in here with some fresh solder to make sure it's all tinned properly. And then I take the third and final wire and tack it in right here. And there we go. In terms of soldering, that is all there is to it. It's just going to be those 3 wires and those 3 points on the motherboard itself. Of course, also being wired up to their respective test pads out on the, I guess, ribbon itself. So that's all you really have to do. So if you're watching this and you're kind of afraid of soldering on here, I would recommend, you know what, at least give it a shot here, because this wasn't all too bad compared to many other installations I've done. Now, of course, when I got all that cleaned up, I also want to see about wire placement, and this is what I ended up doing here. Thankfully, this is just, it looks like 30 gauge solid piece Kynar wire that came with this installation. So thankfully, it's real slim, it's easy to train, it's easy to move around, and I kind of just moved it next to the link cable port that you could see right there, and then I was able to just move each wire respective to each side. That way it didn't get punctured, they didn't get pinched in any way, they weren't damaged is what I was saying. And aside from that, the other wire, the one that's meant for the select button, yeah, you could see it right there, but it just resides right there, like on top of the I guess you can say like the insulation, so the wire's not getting in the way or really bugging anything. Now from here, I just went through the reverse process of getting all of these screws screwed back in. Of course, I made sure all of the buttons and such were already installed on, you know, the front facing portion of the console, but then once I got all of this screwed in here, I did at the end get the sides and the shoulder buttons popped back in place as well too. I figured if I tried to do that any earlier, and not just I figured, this did happen. If I tried to do it any earlier, they just kept getting knocked out of place and kept annoying me, so I had to save those near close for the end. Now right here, awesome, it looks like pretty much everything has been sorted here, and this is almost ready to get all closed up. So I just took that one Phillips head screw, the small black one that goes on kind of sort of the outside of the console, get that sorted in right there, and at this point there's just 6 tri-wing screws that you just need to screw all around the outside of the console, and you're pretty much ready to button up the system at this point if everything has been successfully installed. And even for our final test, yet again right here, I grabbed the 2 batteries with everything screwed in, everything put together. I put in the 2 batteries, I closed it up, turned on the system, and check it out. It's all working, like it looks good, awesome. Here you go, here is the added functionality I was talking about with soldering in those 3 wires, which again, I would really recommend you do if you're going to go all out and do this mod. So here you can see this is one of the, I think one of the lowest screen brightnesses right here, if not the lowest one, but you just hold down the select button and you can increase the brightness and decrease the brightness. And for this specific mod, I believe there's 10 brightness settings. Now there's not any other functionality here. There's no like on-screen display, there's no pixel effect, there's no scan lines, there's no other I guess setups that you could really use. It's just kind of a brightness rocker on here, but it works well enough. Now, the last thing I did here was I, of course, popped in my copy of Max Payne, so we can now see a before and after, and just look at this. Look at this right here. Compared to what we were seeing at the very beginning of the video, this is just so much nicer. It's bright, it looks nice, again, it is readable. Now, the words are kind of cut off there on the subtitles, and that is not how the actual installation of this all looks. That is due to the angle I was recording, but once you have the actual screen and the console in front of you, the alignment, the orientation is just absolutely perfect on it. So I was very happy with this installation, as was my girlfriend, as well as her sister. Everyone was super happy with this overall. So either way, that's been, I guess, this overview of the modification, and this is kind of the point where I do a bit of a review of this as well too. If you have a Game Boy Advance and you're thinking of doing an IPS mod on it, yes, in my opinion, yes. For the original Game Boy Advance here, using those original screens, like in current day, they are almost unusable. They are pretty much near unusable at this point, unfortunately. So really, if you're going to be using a Game Boy Advance like this, having an IPS display will just bring it such a long way forward and really modernize it. It's really nice, especially if you pair one of these with a flash cart. Man, you are rocking at that point. It's fantastic. As for the actual installation itself, the physical installation, taking the system apart, putting it back together is easy enough here. I didn't really have any issues with that as long as you have all the proper tools to do that. Again, I did not do any type of trimming or any type of filing because I don't like doing that. So if you're like me in that regard, I would recommend getting a pre-cut kit. So if you're going to do a full reshell, you just have already everything done at that point and you don't have to do anything further. That is what my personal recommendation would be. In terms of the actual hard parts of this installation, what I believed was the hardest was probably just getting the screen itself installed and getting it aligned properly. I would say, in my opinion, that was probably the hardest part of this installation, and I would most likely say anybody else who's going to attempt or try out this installation would probably agree with me on that regard. And like I said, I guess for the soldering portion, I do know that the soldering parts can really scare a lot of people. I'm not going to say it's easy or hard just because that's going to be subjective to everyone. So over the years, I've kind of learned to say, not really, I guess, address any of these hard mods with a difficulty factor on there. But compared to many other installations I've done, it's really not all too bad. And I personally believe as long as you have, the proper stuff, which would be flux, some isopropyl alcohol, solder, and a soldering iron, and you have the basics of using them, I don't think there would be all too much difficulty getting those 3 wires installed, even if you're not super proficient or you're still new to soldering. As long as you take it slow, I think you can do it just fine. I believe in you, is what I'm saying. Overall, I have to say, this is probably one of my favorite modded systems I've seen from start to finish here, just because, the aesthetic and everything of this, and this also kind of made me jealous as well, too. Right when I finished this up, I said, you know what, I want one of these. Like, I want to grab one of my other Game Boys, I want to get a home mod kit for this, and I want to do this myself. Will I use it that much? No, probably not. But do I want it? Absolutely, because it is cool. And I will say, if you're wanting to play Game Boy Advance games on native Game Boy Advance hardware, something like this is the way to go. Oh yeah, and as a final touch, you can see that there is a big portion right there for a sticker, and I guess even the battery cover as well too. There's typically a sticker that goes on top of that. There was no sticker included for the battery cover, and personally I like that it says Game Boy right there, so I didn't mind that. However, I ended up taking this sticker right here and I just plopped it onto the back of the Game Boy. This one did come with the kit, so it's not like anything I created. I just put it on here, but there we go. Once you set this up, it does look lovely. And there is a serial number on there, but it is definitely not a unique serial number. I am sure that is not a unique serial number, so there we go. It's all complete at this point. Like, this is all complete. I was really happy to see it. Either way, that is about it for this video here. I hope you all enjoyed it. I hope you all had fun watching, and I hope maybe this even inspired some of you all to pick up a raggedy old Game Boy Advance and give it some nice new life with one of these kits here. Anyways, as I always say, this is Mr. Mario, signing off. Thank you all for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, a like would absolutely be appreciated, and if you didn't like it, a dislike is fine as well too.